Hello everyone, this is Pippin Williamson with pippinsplugins.com, and what I'm going to show you in this quick tutorial is how to work with the Transients API in WordPress. Essentially, the Transients API is a method of storing cached data in WordPress. And right now you can see that I'm on the Codex page for the Transients API, and it's a pretty simple set of functions to work with. Essentially, we have a function that's going to store data, store it in a cache with a set expiration. And then we have a function to also retrieve that cache data and then delete it if we want. So what I'm going to show you is just a really simple example of how to set a transient. So we're going to basically take a set of data, we're going to store it in a transient or in a cache, and then we're going to retrieve that data from the cache itself. So the examples I'm going to show you are really simple, but they can be very easily expanded to much more realistic and useful purposes. So I'm going to go over here, and this is my custom functions plugin. This is just a plugin that I leave running at all times that just allows me to tinker with code. So we're just going to write one function here, and let's just call it Pippin Transient Demo, just like this. Okay, and in order to demo this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to attach this function to the admin notices hook. Having serious trouble typing this morning. So just like this. The reason I'm going to do this is it gives me a really easy way to output or echo information. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to just do this, echo test. And now what's going to happen in my local WordPress is I'm going to see this up here, test. So I'm going to use this to allow me a method to display the cached information for you so that you can very easily see it. So let's get rid of this, and we're going to use two functions to start with. One is getTransient and the other is setTransient. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set our data parameter, data equals getTransient, then the name of the transient that we want to get. This name can be anything. It's determined when you set the transient itself. So I'm just going to do sample trans for now, just to make it simple. So basically, this is going to go and retrieve the value stored in the sample transient if it's there. Now, what we do is we basically go do a check to make sure whether or not the transient was actually available. So if false, then a triple equal sign data. So basically, if this transient was not received or not retrieved, sorry, we're going to do this. Do this if no transient set. Okay, so what this does now is first it goes and retrieves the transient. If the transient is available, great. If it's not available, it's going to go into here. And at the very end, we're going to echo out the transient, the value of it. So now, let's just say data equals, this is the data stored in the transient, just like that. And now what we do is set transient, the name of our transient, just like that, make sure they match. The second parameter is the value we want to store. And then the third parameter, which is optional, is the length of time in seconds that we want this value to be stored. So let's set it to 10 for now. Okay, so now let me walk you back through what's going to happen real quick. First of all, we're going to set up a variable called data, and we're going to retrieve the value of the transient called sample trans. If it is available, or if there's data stored, we're going to bypass all of this. So you can imagine that's just gone. And it's going to echo out the value of whatever is stored in this transient. If, however, the transient is empty or it's not set, which is right here, then we go and set the data variable to this value, and then we store it in a transient right here. So let's see what happens. Okay, so we see that this is the data, oops, excuse that selection. This is the data stored in the transient, has been echoed out through here because we have it set up with admin notices. And now, basically, every time that I refresh, what this is going to do is instead of setting the data, it's actually going to retrieve the value stored from the transient itself. So why is this useful? Well, this is actually extremely useful because it's the same way that caching, essentially this is the cache, is the same way caching has a huge improvement on performance. So let's imagine for a second that we're doing an expensive database query where we are going and querying the database for a whole bunch of different posts, and it takes up a lot of resources. Well, if we store that query in a transient, and this query only has to be refreshed every couple hours or so, then every single time the page is loaded, instead of doing that query, which is expensive, we're simply going to retrieve it from the cached value using the get transient. So you can see immediately this could have a huge performance impact. Obviously, using it just to store little text strings like this is going to have zero impact, if not a negative performance, because then we have to actually go and get the transient variable, we have to set it, etc. So assuming that you're doing this for what it's actually used for, it's extremely valuable. So now let me kind of demo to you how this works a little bit more. So right now we see this is the data stored in the transient. So I'm going to change this. This is the data stored in the cache. Now let's go over here and refresh. Note, it still says this is the data stored in the transient. That's because it retrieved the cache value. So let's refresh again. Now it's changed. I set it to refresh every 10 seconds. Well, that's what it's done. It simply refreshed it and said that, oh, this is what I need to get in the cache now. So we've refreshed the value. So you can think of this as, well, the database was updated, so we've requeried it after our expiration date to make sure that our cache is up to date, and now we're going to display the up-to-date data. So if we change this again, this is the new cache. Let's go see what we see. Well, we see it, and that's because we refreshed right on top of the expiration date. So this is the new caches. And no, we don't see it yet. Let's refresh again. Still don't see it. Refresh again. And now we see it, because now we've hit that 10-second expiration. So you could theoretically, or not even really theoretically, in a very likely situation, let's say that you're querying the database for a whole bunch of different posts. Maybe this is a related post plugin. What you would do is you would query the database, you would store that query in the transient, and then you would only ever perform that query if you saw that the transient that you set it as was either expired or non-existent. So if false, the data, that means that the query needs to happen again because the transient has expired. Go and do this. Otherwise, just simply use the query as is, as stored in the cache, therefore saving a lot of your performance, increasing your performance dramatically. So especially on a large site that has lots and lots of queries, if you were to implement this across the site in a whole bunch of different areas, you could dramatically increase your performance. So I hope this makes sense. This is kind of a really simple introduction to the Transients API. But it doesn't really get a lot more complex than this. The Transients API is really simple. The thing is it sounds complex. It's really not. It is as simple as this. So I would encourage you to take this little sample that I've shown you here and play with it. Work with setting up your data variable to actually contain a lot of all of the query from your database. So maybe a get post query or a get comments query or something like that. And test it, play with it, have fun. And I really encourage you to use it in your plugins. It has a significant performance improvement when used correctly, especially on expensive queries. So anyway, that's a simple introduction to the Transients API in WordPress.